This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to first-hand Cold War history accounts. Do make sure you follow us in your podcast app or join our emailing list at coldwarconversations.com. Communist Poland had universal conscription, and the armed forces were huge by contemporary standards. The Polish People's Army, Navy and Air Force had just over 400,000 troops for most of the 1980s, in a country of 36 million. Tom was a conscript in the Polish People's Army from 1987 to 1989. He served as a radio operator in Legnica for the rocket artillery. His service was at an interesting time when the communist dominance ended as Poland began to embrace democracy, with its first free elections since before World War II. Tom shares details of his conscription process, selection and initial training. We also hear of training exercises, attempts at political indoctrination, and his role if the Cold War had ever turned hot. I'm very keen to expand our library of Warsaw Pact Voices, so if you know of any other English speakers who served in the Warsaw Pact Forces during the Cold War, do let me know. The battle to preserve Cold War history is ongoing, and your support can provide me with the ammunition to continue to keep this podcast on the air. Via a simple monthly donation, you'll become one of our community and get a sought-after Cold War Conversations drinks coaster as a thank you, and you'll bask in the warm glow of knowing that you're helping to preserve Cold War history.
Hello there, my name is Mark Franks and I served in the Royal Air Force from 1982 through to 2007. What I find fascinating about Cold War Conversations are the stories and opinions of those that lived the other side of the Iron Curtain over that period.
Just go to coldwarconversations.com/donate. If a monthly contribution is not your cup of tea, we also welcome one-off donations via coldwarconversations.com/donate. I'm delighted to welcome Tom to our Cold War conversation.
You were 17 years old, and usually this process was organized together by your school and a local conscription office, let's say, which is military, unit. So it was like one place, usually in a town, when from all schools, all the 17 years old lads gathered together, and there were several, desks with military, people.
How was your role selected? I mean, how did they assign you to your role?
First, on the register, and I said in 70 years old when it happened. It was like interview as well, because they asking your hobbies, interest, and stuff, and where would you like to serve? So I said, because I was already young radio amateur, my dad was electrician, qualified electrician, and radio engineer, and radio amateur. So we had like family tradition. And I thought, I would like to, if I have to serve, this is something I would enjoy, because instead of going like, infantry or artillery, something, it's not my really, I don't like it. So I said, if I'm gonna spend some time in army, I didn't know if I get to uni. If I wouldn't get to uni, I would serve 2 years proper. So I thought, okay, so let's at least serve in the branch I really liked, that kind of my hobby, corresponding. There were some questions. They were checking your medical records, and they used to give you, let's say, health category, because in Polish army there were several health categories. You were just ready to serve, or just not really capable of serving in the army. There were 3 categories. Officially, army had to do like targets, in conscription. So in the end, they didn't really take this in consideration. If you A1 or A3, you were going to the service. So it was just one day experience. You were in let's say, high school, college age. And when you were registered, and then you were excited because as a result of this, you were issued with army book, military service pass, as some countries name it. But anyway, it was little green, smaller the passport, but green book. Then at a year of 18, next following year, those who were not in education anymore were conscripted. Myself, because I was still in the education, I was aspiring to higher education, university. So you were like postponed for 1 year till you finish your secondary education. Once you finish your secondary education, there were like two ways. If I want go to university, I would serve in the army as a regular conscript, or because I was about to go to uni. So there was 6 months service in the summertime in kind of cadet, like NCO for specialized soldiers. I mean specialized unit like radio, staff, some other, branches of army, which were very sophisticated because they were aiming for draft people who had some knowledge, some education. So I did this 6 months like school or something, and then you were allowed to go to uni. In a uni, you had like every week few hours of class where you going, and then you were like shooting. And we would never consider ourselves as a regular army because we always were students. Regular army used to call us peasants, like birds with, because we were students. They not really a professional army, but to be honest, we did loads of calculations, operating these computers, early computers, army or something. So, but they will never consider us as a student, as a, how to say, mincemeat for the front line.
Yeah, what we'd call cannon fodder.
Yes, exactly. It was just like kind of living in between two worlds, regular, proper, conscript army, which were harsh conditions, loads of trainings, drills, and then we had more slack terms, easier terms, not such discipline, because it just like, we were serving, it was mandatory serving anyway, but they never gonna be a serious army. They reading books, they softies. But on the other hand, we had loads of jobs within, when there was like field training, polygon, we used to call it. When you're going to the field train, with regulars, we had lots of very important jobs to do. Like, I remember some guys doing coordinates they were students of maths or something, physics, but they have to coordinate with rocket artillery proper, and stuff on these army computers. I was in radio comms. At some point, they were really dependent on us, but we didn't get lots of, let's say, bollocking or harsh terms from regular NCOs, let's say, like proper corporal, standing on other troops, because they were never considered as army material, let's say, this way.
Yeah, you were never intended to be in the front line. You were supposed to be working the technology and some distance behind the lines, I guess.
Yeah. And I think the most bizarre was when on year 2, we met because, instead of like you have in uni, summer break, on year 2, I've met guys from medical uni, future doctors, and they were completely lost there. There was different world for them, but they were serving as medical staff, but not senior. and they were completely lost with discipline, with this routine, just completely unused to it. But they were the most cherished, actually, part of the within field camp, because they could prescribe funny tablets, or they could organize pure spirit from the laboratory. So they were most cherished guys, because they had power of make it easier to for these harsh conditions.
From what you were saying there, it sounded like with university that you had some form of military classes when you were at uni.
Yes, but it was like stamp on this intellectual class. You need to know your place within this ruling workforce class. I don't know, it's typical communist system when all intelligentsia has to know its place. Kind of put stamp on your, aspiration that in the end, your aspiration doesn't matter. It's what matters is our joint effort and standing against NATO and, capitalism and stuff. Instead of going on lecture about sociology or philosophy, you had as well 1.5 hours a week to 3 hours lecture. And lecture was about politics, about socialism, and about how it's better. It was part of military, service, but in reality, it was political stuff. We didn't learn much about military. We did learn about politics, why West is so evil, why we should stand together, and all this, I would say, bollocks. No one believed this, We were, laughing, well, not openly, but, everyone just looks and, I think no one took it seriously. But I think it was the time, the most, I would call it, waste of my life. The most, and everyone had the same feeling. It was absolutely a waste of time. But good thing was when we had a lecturer who didn't believe the same. He was so he was on the same side like we are. So at least it was gone quick, and but on many occasions, unfortunately, we had some believer. Let's say these people were like opportunists to show your power. For them, from beginning, in these lectures, we were like let know that we are nothing to them. We just students. So we were this useless class, intelligentsia. I mean, in the terms of social classes, we are intelligentsia, so we are useless.
Where did you receive your military radio training?
I was granted to go to this NCO school not far from where I live, which was 10 miles away only. It was only 2 in Poland, another one in other side. Usually you get ticket to army and you go to the other part of Poland, because there was tactics, to break connection with families. So they said, okay, close enough, you could go there.
You mentioned earlier that NATO was still considered the enemy. So was the training with a view to offensive actions, or was your training purely defensive at this point?
Regular military training, when you have shooting and drill, on a field, it was more defensive. But then sudden change when you had classroom with radio comms, then it came really like encryption, your communication, and structure, how you communicate, and it was offensive, really. It was orientated towards West. I mean, there were concentration of units, military units, tank groups, and armored, infantry regiments along the West border, ready to go to East Germany. I think it was like second wave or something, and we were knew that it's gonna be like second wave about structure and discipline of communication, how to communicate. So two things: basic military training was official defensive in case of nuke strikes, but your professional training, when on your job, what you're supposed to do, was rather offensive one. Actually, we were told we on the second line of defense or offense.
Because I think some of the Polish forces were earmarked for Denmark.
I lived in Silesia, southwest. So we were actually marked for Thuringia, Hessen, this area, if we were find ourselves, serving in this armored infantry units or tanks units from southwest Poland, we would go as a relief forces for Russian units stationed already in Saxony, and who were already in moving to the Thuringia, Hessen, or Bayern, this area, like on second wave following.
Were you given much weapons training at all? Was your training very different to what a fighting soldier would have, or was there some weapons training?
Basic mandatory was AK-47, but well, it wasn't 47. It was because they were new at the time. Well, we recognized this new AK-74. AKM or AKMS, can't remember. There was folding stock. This 5.45 millimeter. They were quite fresh in army because they were quite small, smaller than regular one. So we were issued the first, and we were learned to shoot, which is just on the beginning 2 days really, and then shooting range. And shooting range was awful because kick was quite strong, and not everyone used to, so we had all these, shoulders quite bruised, and aiming or something, it was badly really on this. Sorry if I call it wrong, but it was a short one version of AK-74 version. Then, pistols. It was P64, which was really, you could just shoot from 10 meters, away, and you had 50-50 chance you hit target of, I don't know, Titanic. They were so inaccurate, you wouldn't believe. Really bad weapon. But because of our job's role, we supposed to have the short weapons, not long one. I mean, not proper one. And throwing grenades, obviously, training, and and anti, let's say, gas or radiation, this rubber-like shoot jumps. I mean, they were really awful, and because we had to do some even distance, running in this, people were really nearly suffocated, and this was the worst training. As I remember, when you had to just run some distance with already smoke screen and this tear gas, just to make you impression that you have to cover this field and on time, and dressing off this shields. And I'm not talking only about gas mask, it was full, cover shield, so it was one of the worst I remember. But basically we had mandatory on short weapons, I mean fire arms, and just grenades. No, we didn't get any other more sophisticated, like infantry stuff.
So your role, would you have been mobile in an armored personnel carrier or something?
On most occasions, I was like BMP, one of the BMP converted to the com staff. loads of communication stuff. But on 2 occasions, on other year, I was in proper one. It was like truck with like armored protection, inside, like regular truck looks like, but on the back, instead of flatbed, you have build up this armored, chamber with full loaded with communication stuff, and it used to tow we used to tow trailer with another one like chamber, or there were different trailers. One trailer had communication because let's say short waves, ultra short waves on different frequencies, but as well trailers had antenna systems. So our truck used to tow antenna system behind for the communication. We unfolding and setting them up inside. Loads of radio station on different, working on different levels, plus some encryption stuff. It was modern. It was quite new, and there was really a big deal. I think it was new in the army, just like early computers.
How was the encryption done? Did you say it was done via computer technology, or did you have code books as well?
They were code books, but because I was on radio up on shortwave, ultra short waves, and I wasn't team of the encryption, so I don't know exactly process because we were separate. We were not supposed to know, but I gather because I saw what's there and how they working. It was still analog process in encrypting, but computers were like to shorting process, do calculations, some calculations for them. I was receiving messages encrypted, and I had to record them and pass to the encryption team, and vice versa.
And were there still political officers in the Polish army at this point?
Oh, yes. So every company had one on company level. I can't remember if it was on platoon level even. No, I don't think so. But company level, yes. We had the political officer, the old ones, and they were, as I said, opportunists, believe it. And I didn't like them because they couldn't cope with changes in the world. Late 80s, it was started with globalization and stuff, and they felt like really frightened by the West. You could see with them, they couldn't cope with reality. So I'm glad they didn't have any influence of this red button, to start the war, because it was just like they've noticed changes in society, how things progress, but they couldn't really accept this. They were like, we're gonna show them, in the end, we're gonna show them, we're gonna show West, superiority or whatever. And there were young chaps, typical opportunists, sometimes fresh after military school, they were trying to fraternize with us, to talk easy talks, organizing even, vodka, alcohol. Oh, guys, we're gonna organize. I'm gonna organize. I have this connections with, stuff and with logistic. But I bet that all of them, they were as well secret police agents. How to say? In Poland, we had the category tajny współpracownik, which means secret cooperator with secret police.
So a collaborator and informer.
Informer, yes. The secret informer. Oh, that's the best description. So, and I bet every political officer had to sign this contract for being as well a secret informer. So, and we knew this. Well, most of us knew it. We didn't want really to, banter with them, because you just slip your tongue or something, and you didn't know what consequences could be. And I was still not my uni was not still finished. I wasn't graduate yet, so it could affect my process of graduating. So no one want to risk career. So yeah, they were political officers, but they had good influence of regular conscripts from those guys, young guys, 18 years old, who just finish basic education with like some, educations. So they were just like role models, let's say. In my team, we all were, let's say, newly graduates. So have some background, some education, some knowledge. And to be honest, all of us, like single one, we despise this system, and we're anti-army, to be honest. We had to, because we were serving because we had to, but everyone, as I remember, would just like drop the uniform instantly as, the gates close, barrack gates close behind you. It's nothing to do with patriotism. It's about when you're serving oppressive system, you try to just strip yourself of all this ranks and uniform. For that reason, I have no pictures from my time in uniform when I was wearing uniform. But I really didn't like it because you were part of the system. You really didn't like it. For people, I think in the West, it's very difficult to understand because serving in the army is quite patriotic. You dedicate yourself for your country. But in time, what I was doing, it was quite opposite. You are doing your time in army, being against your fellow, citizens, fellow people, because army was one of the way to oppress country.
Were you ever worried that you would be ordered to, I don't know, stop a demonstration or something like that?
Not at the moment when I was serving. It's reason why, because already police, militia obywatelska developed quite strong forces to oppress all this civil unrest. Beginning of the 80s, they had no such big forces, in terms of numbers. ZOMO, which was special police military.
It's like a paramilitary unit within the police, the ZOMO, yeah.
Yes. And they were quite in 80s when Solidarity broke out. They were not big enough to suppress, they were just fresh. So on that occasion, quite authorities were used army for this job. But since Jaruzelski introduced this curfew on 1981, this ZOMO forces were really expanding quite big. So when I was serving in 87, 88, ZOMO was so big they could cope themselves with any, let's say, unrest, any protest. So army was like standing away, even army generals didn't want to get involved anymore with political, movement. They pretend that army is not politically involved in the Polish affairs. It's neutral. It wasn't true. Because on every level we had this politrooks, political officers. We were still, learning how to cope with NATO strike or how to counter strike to NATO. We still about leading, were taught and reminded about leading way of Communist Party, PZPR. So in fact, they were not neutral, but they pretend for the society that they are neutral.
Were you in many exercises? I mean, obviously you would have been practicing all the time, but as far as a big, maybe Warsaw Pact exercise, did you ever participate in anything like that?
I think I missed one. It was 188. We had field days. Well, I had nearly 2 months in the eastern border, other side of the country, near Soviet Union border, time, Brest, Terespol. So I could tell you that all this, how to say, feeling, how you were doing this field exercises was completely different. It was, you had this impression that Big Brother looks at you, and officers, NCOs, they were act completely different. We had more serious. When we were doing in our region, field exercises, it was like easygoing. Okay, we had some field walks and then setting up comms stations, masking and encryption. It wasn't set time. We had in our time, and distances were not so big. Well, I thought, but then following year, my last year, just before we went to this, east part. Really, we had like 2 kilometers to Soviet Union border, and we could see Soviet, I think border soldiers or something, or patrolling border. So it was so close. And instantly on the first night, 20-mile walk with full equipment on the back, which we were not used to, but because no one was so crazy when, last year or so, but now suddenly let's took it all serious. Second night, again, 20 miles plus set up camp and completely camouflage and hidden, some relay point. I mean, communication relay. And third night was, again, somewhere in the fields, in a just boggy terrain, marshy, boggy terrain. I think to intercept some communication we were setting up against it. So it was suddenly it was serious, with all seriousness taken, and our NCOs didn't want they were like suddenly change approach, everything. They try to make some impression of leading. There were different leading officers. So that's one of the reasons. But we had I think there were Russians as well, observers on this exercise. So maybe that's the reason why we had to, suddenly do everything proper, serious way.
Everything by the book.
Yes, but you see, it's 1988, and we had Russian, Soviet observers within army, how we're doing. And they had, final word.
Did you work with any of the other Warsaw Pact countries, or was it just really the Russians that you had dealings with?
Oh, we dealt with quite a lot with Russians in where there was our NCO school, radiocom school, Legnica, because Legnica was headquarters of Russian Group Army North, as I remember, and there were plenty of Russians, and they have as well a radiocom school there, or unit. So on many occasions we actually ended up on a field, not together, but some exchange parts. Our, let's say, barracks or garrison, where the school was next door to Russian one. It was just literally a wall, brick wall. Behind the brick wall was Russian part. So it's sometimes with these chaps, I think it was unit who was serving. There was Russian airfield as well, so they were serving on the airfield communication. So because the equipment was very similar in long range, especially long range, was quite same. So if we lacking any parts or something, we used to go there asking them if they have any, for servicing. And I remember going, to Russian next door garrison, uh, asking for some, let's say Vanya or whatever, Russian name, because and he knows he has this logistic, in some storage. He has these tubes. We need one, and on a piece of paper, he just write them off or something, and we got them. But it was first few phone calls, to organize this. Our, leading master of school. I mean, there was like in terms of teacher, but he was NCO, so he used to organize. Oh, guys, I just spoke with the Russian. You go there on particular time because it was on a gate. You have to be on particular time. When I'm talking about this, I think it was quite kind of stealing from Russian, storage, because he was writing off the Russian bloke who was responsible. He was writing off tubes. I remember tubes especially as broken or whatever. And then a particular time, let's say 5:15, at this time at this gate, we're gonna do a deal. So he was handing over us these tubes. They always request something else, and we used to bring and fitting tubes, then tuning stuff, working. Our commandant was happy like hell because we are another two pieces of equipment now working, and he can just put in the report that we successfully repair this.
Were you ever instructed what to do if you were captured by NATO forces? What information you could give them?
No, we didn't have any training about this, but there was from political officer on the beginning when we were talking about this chain command, when we movement towards west, and because it was more like being how we're gonna be allocated in the future in case of war broke out and what's gonna happen. And it was like 15 minutes about what it could be if we were captured, and we were talking only about rank and service number. That's all. And obviously damage stuff before it falls in hands of enemy.
So destroy your code books and damage the equipment so it can't be used.
Damage equipment, yes, and specifically we had the specifics because some people don't realize that there are very easy way to completely make disuse equipment. You don't need to burn everything. You don't need to, explode everything. Just there are particular parts, especially with radios, that you can just take it away or something, and it's rendering completely useless. So we knew, we were on each part of equipment as well. We were trained how to make it completely rendered without much effort or, without using grenade, but your brain, that way.
You mentioned Legnica before, the big Russian garrison town, and this was right next to your base as well. The Soviet base was right next to your base, was it?
Legnica, from my point of view, was very specific and important when we're talking about this town. First, my family and I lived, and I was born just 10 miles away from Legnica. Legnica is was big town city, today size of 200,000 citizens, living there. So it's quite big. And at that time was the same amount. But specifics of Legnica was in 1945, just after Second World War finished, Soviets decide to set up there in Legnica one of the command center of the Russian occupying forces for Germany and for Poland. So it became headquarters for Soviet forces for Poland. They used to call it Army Group North, I think. Germany was Army Group West. So yeah, we had Army Group North, and it was proper headquarters with all center of communication, of logistic for all Soviet forces in Poland. And on the top, there were loads of high-ranking staff, Soviets living in Legnica with their families. And they decide to, like in Berlin, they divide Legnica in half. Former German town was divided in half, and with wall as well, like in Germany. And behind the wall, Legnica is like smaller Berlin, copy of Berlin of the time, because the Russian quarter was surrounded by the wall, and there was living quarters. They were about, some historians even today estimated it was nearly 100,000 people, Russians living there behind the wall, military and civilian staff. And other half of the town was Polish. But with Polish, let's say Polish part, there was like 1/3 as well military garrison, which including there were some hospital, there was especially communication radio forces which I was serving. So I can, and our part of barracks was like next door to the Russian. But I still remember there's walls, across the town with gates, with checkpoints, Russian checkpoints, which was literally like you see in Berlin. And there was lots of Polish people who lived in Legnica, but who were working in the Russian quarter. But they had to carry with them a special pass. They were always on a checkpoint searched, to pass through for their work and back. So it was a really important, place, even on when you have railway station in Legnica. It was only one, and it was in Polish part, but there were a special platform only for Russian, for Soviets. And you cannot go on this platform unless you are a Soviet soldier with a special pass or something. It was, and from that platform, there was running twice a day direct trains to Moscow. So I used to travel, because my mom worked sometime in Legnica, for some sort of period of time. I was like, to my military, NCO school, so in a train as well from my town, Yavor. And we just, train just stopped on the platform, and next platform was the Russian, and the train to Moscow was ready, or boarding with lots of Russians, and Russians and military Soviets, boarding them.
As you're getting into 1989, how is the army changing with, for example, the electoral success of Solidarity? Does that have any impact on the way you see the army changing at that point?
I would say discipline within army falls much lower. Slack. Relax. It's not, relax is very wrong way to describe, but lack of discipline in a lower, especially levels. On the high ranks, you could see this waiting for the outcome, what's gonna happen, how it's gonna happen. It was more like waiting a game. But army hasn't changed on this conscript level for next, let's say, few years. It's a part of political stuff. So political officers and all this stuff disappeared soon after. But way of treating conscripts, trainings, everything was carried on for next, I think, 2 or 3 years. So army in general hasn't changed for the next few years, good few years.
And still with a view that the West is a threat.
No, this very quickly disappeared. Reason why no one believed even in late 80s. It was talking about when we had this political lectures, everyone, just could laugh, really. No one believed this thing. We did understand that if war broke out, we might end up in Germany as a second wave. But that was quite real. But in terms of that NATO is a threat in this, so 89, 90, this is gone. There was no any offensive. Army become more like defensive one.
I guess the worry was that the Russians wouldn't leave or would come back.
Yeah, till they leave Poland, army was like carry on without this edge, without this, anti-NATO propaganda. But they were carrying on the same system, the same trainings, the same military structure, till we had Soviet in Poland. And when they withdraw in 92, then I think some kind of reforms has started on many levels. But till then, till they literally withdraw, army, I remember army hasn't changed, because I left 89, I had friends who were in 91 or 92, and when we spoke, and we just like the same, we're talking about the same story, a part of this political bullshit. I used to, hear nothing, the same, some silly trainings which we already knew they were used, pointless, they still were carried on, and all this.
When you look back at your career in the Polish People's Army, how do you view that now?
Hard to say career.
I'm joking. That was a bit tongue-in-cheek.
Yes. Yeah. But you see, from one hand, I really, I didn't like this term, time.
Mm-hmm.
But as well, I appreciate, and I found lots of laughs when I remember that how bad army we were, how useless army we were. It just makes you really laugh, smiling, and then and then you just think, no, it wasn't bad. It was quite fun because we did loads of opposite. We did loads of stuff you're supposed to not. In terms of discipline, we were absolutely appalling. It just you wouldn't do in professional army whatsoever, but we had to serve. So this, if you have 6 months to serve, you're trying to find how the easiest way is to spend this time, not conflicting. Somehow, it reminds me the Czech novel of Schweik.
The Good Soldier Strike.
Yeah. We were kind of this. We were that kind of army, really.
Yeah. So you were almost like pretending to do the job.
Oh yeah.
But not really doing it. Make yourself look busy.
Yes, definitely. We did. We did pretend, especially when we had. I can't remember R108 or something radio station, which was like backpack. You could have it. It's ultra shortwave radio station, analog, no any encryption or something. It was close communication on a battlefield, really, stuff on short range, and we had to pretend, especially in the summertime on exercise, 3 times, I think. They were bulky, they were heavy, not really nice to carry on, and so we used to teams between each other. We used to agree what sort of reports we're gonna send each other on a piece of paper, and then instead of carrying the massive batteries, in this radio station, so like you have, let's say, tourist backpack on your back, and half loaded with proper batteries, car batteries. So like it was heavy. So instead of these batteries, we used to have alcohol, bottles of alcohol or beer, and just only one set to keep working in case some, gonna call us or something. But then in a field, we have already reports, agreed. So we put in the books what we did, and then next few hours enjoy your summertime. That kind of army.
Don't miss the episode extras such as videos, photos and other content. Just look for the link in the podcast information. The podcast wouldn't exist without the generous support of our financial supporters, and I'd like to thank one and all of them for keeping the podcast on the road. If you'd like to help the project, just go to coldwarconversations.com/donate. The Cold War conversation continues in our Facebook discussion group. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thanks very much for listening, and see you next week.